Welcome to the history section. We're focusing today on the period on Hispaniola between 1498 and 1500. This was a really tumultuous time defined by the conflict between the Admiral and the rebels led by Francisco Roldán.
It's a conflict that really spirals out of control and ultimately forces the hand of the Catholic sovereigns.
Right, and it all begins with these very fraught attempts at negotiation in late 1498.
Exactly. The Admiral is trying to restore order after 2 years of open revolt, but Roldán is negotiating from, well, a position of perceived strength.
So the Admiral sends a letter trying to start a dialogue.
He does, and Roldán agrees to meet, but with a major condition. It sort of sets the tone for everything that follows.
Which was?
He demanded a safe conduct. He would only meet if he was guaranteed immunity from arrest or harm.
So he's not acting like a subordinate returning to the fold. He's acting like an equal party in a negotiation.
Precisely. And the Admiral, needing a resolution, provides this document on October 26th.
But this procedural step, this agreement to meet safely, it doesn't lead to a breakthrough. The conference fails almost immediately.
It collapses. The demands Roldán puts on the table are just so excessive, so completely unreasonable.
What kind of demands were they?
The research suggests they were so extreme that the Admiral suspected they weren't even genuine.
So a pretext.
Yes. He believed Roldán was just using the talks as a cover to, try and corrupt more of the Admiral's own men.
Which would explain why the Admiral just walked away from the conference. There was no accord to be reached.
He essentially called Roldán's bluff. He left, signaling that the negotiations were over until a more reasonable proposition was made.
So, recognizing that this face-to-face approach is just a dead end, the Admiral changes tactics. He delegates.
A smart move politically. He appoints his major domo, Diego de Salamanca, to continue the talks.
Granting him full authority to finalize an agreement. It removes the Admiral from the direct insult of the negotiations, but keeps the process moving.
And Roldán responds to this. On November 6th, he sends his formal articles of agreement.
But again, these aren't really negotiation points.
No, he presents them as a final offer. He claims it's the absolute maximum he could get his own followers to agree to.
And he adds a bit of pressure.
He does. He mentions that the settlement at Bono, where his men are based, is running out of food. It's a logistical threat.
Essentially, sign this deal or we'll be forced to start fighting again just to feed ourselves.
That's the implicit message. It's a combination of political demands and practical urgency.
At the same time, the Admiral tries another route to break the stalemate. He offers clemency.
Right. On November 11th, he bypasses Roldán's leadership and issues a formal amnesty aimed at the rank-and-file rebels.
This is a public decree posted at the fort gates for 30 days.
A direct appeal to the common man.
And the terms were, all things considered, incredibly generous, weren't they?
Remarkably so. He offered free passage back to Castile, full payment of all back wages, and protection under the law.
All they had to do was present themselves within that 30-day window.
But there was also a warning. If they didn't appear, he would proceed against them with the full force of the law.
So the Admiral dispatches his envoy, Carvajal, with this signed amnesty, expecting it to, peel away support from Roldán.
And the response is just utter contempt.
They laughed at it.
They did. Roldán and his men called the document haughty and openly mocked the idea that they needed a pardon from the Admiral. They saw it as weakness, not generosity.
And this wasn't just talk. While these so-called negotiations were happening, Roldán's men were actively engaged in military operations.
Absolutely. When Carvajal arrives to deliver the amnesty, he finds the rebels are in the middle of besieging the loyalist commander, Ballester, at the fort in Concepcion.
So they're negotiating peace while actively waging war.
Yes. Their motives were twofold. They were trying to capture a specific man that Roldán wanted to execute, and they were trying to starve out the garrison by cutting off their provisions.
And Carvajal's arrival, ironically delivering a peace offer, is what breaks the siege.
It forced them to pull back, but it perfectly illustrates the bad faith of the entire process. The talks were just a smokescreen.
This forces the Admiral's hand. He has to end the crisis at almost any cost. This leads to the final agreement on November 21st, 1498.
A true capitulation. Signed by Roldán on one side and the Admiral's representatives Carvajal and Salamanca on the other.
Let's break down just how much this agreement cost the Admiral. It starts with providing ships for the rebels' departure.
The first point. The Admiral had to provide 2 well-provisioned, seaworthy ships for Roldán and his entire company.
And there was a specific strategic location for this handover.
Yes, the port of Zaragoza. This was deep in rebel-held territory in the west of the island.
So Roldán could oversee the entire process.
Exactly. It ensured the rebels controlled the logistics, far from the admiral's oversight.
Then there's the financial compensation, which is just staggering.
It's incredible. First, he had to order the payment of all back wages, which is standard enough.
But the second part is the real political blow.
It is. He was forced to write a formal letter to the sovereigns attesting to the rebels' good service.
He had to whitewash 2 years of treason.
He had to. This letter was required to make sure they got paid when they returned to Castile. It was a complete humiliation.
The agreement also granted them compensation in the form of property and people.
Yes, they were granted individuals designated as slaves from a previous distribution, framed as payment for their hardships.
It legitimized them. And there was a specific and kind of complex clause about their families.
There was. Any indigenous women they had formed relationships with and any children from those unions were to be considered free and allowed to travel with the men to Castile.
An attempt to deal with the social realities of the situation.
This was ensuring these families weren't broken up or the women and children classified as property.
The provisions for the voyage itself were also incredibly detailed, weren't they?
They were, and it speaks to how dire the supply situation was in the colony. The admiral had to load the ships with everything they needed.
And there was a backup plan in case the food spoiled.
A critical clause. If the standard bread went bad, Roldán was authorized to get his own supplies, specifically 3,000 kilograms of biscuit or 30 sacks of wheat or cassava bread.
That's a huge amount of non-perishable food to divert from a starving colony.
A massive logistical strain.
And there were other clauses about returning property, validating their ownership of goods they'd seized during the revolt.
And even livestock. The admiral had to write another letter confirming Roldán owned a herd of 120 large and 230 small pigs.
And that the administration had to pay Roldán for any of those pigs the Loyalists had eaten to survive.
It's unbelievable. He was monetizing every aspect of his rebellion, forcing the government to pay him for supplies it had taken to fight him.
So to finalize it, Roldán agreed to show up at Concepcion within 10 days and sail within 50. This was supposed to be the end of it.
It was supposed to be. But as history tells us, Roldán and his men never boarded those ships.
So this incredibly costly, detailed agreement falls apart almost immediately.
It does. The failure to depart leads to a complete renegotiation that empowers the rebels even further.
Now, the admiral seems to have acted in good faith at first. He signed the articles, granted the safe conducts.
He even gave land grants to some of the rebels who decided they wanted to stay instead of returning to Castile. He was trying to stabilize the situation.
But the research makes it clear he was pained by this. He knew he was rewarding treason.
He was, and the cost was immense. His brother, the Adelantado, had to halt all exploration of the mainland and shut down the new pearl fishery.
All resources were diverted to provisioning these 2 ships for Roldán.
Every bit of labor, every sack of flour. Carvajal was sent overland to Zaragua to speed things up, but then things out of their control started to happen.
The ships themselves, the Niña and the Santa Cruz.
They finally set sail at the end of January 1499, already behind schedule.
And they run right into a storm.
A bad one. It forces them into another port for over a month until March. Then, the Niña, which was a veteran vessel, needed significant repairs.
These are legitimate, unavoidable delays.
Completely. The Santa Cruz eventually gets to Zaragua, and the Niña follows 11 days later. But by then, the 50-day deadline from the agreement was long gone.
And Roldán's men use this as their excuse.
They exploit it perfectly. They write to the admiral accusing him of intentionally delaying the ships. They use the storm and the repairs as evidence of a conspiracy against them.
Declaring the ships unseaworthy and their provisions gone.
And therefore, they claimed they were justified in staying on the island to seek redress directly from the sovereigns. It was a brilliant, cynical move.
Which brings us to the next round of negotiations in Azua in August of 1499.
The admiral is desperate at this point. He calls it a wretched business. The opposition is growing, new plots are forming, he has to make a deal.
And this new pact is an even greater surrender.
It is. Roldán presents 4 core demands, and the admiral is forced to accept every single one.
Let's walk through them. The first deals with passage.
Roldán demands that 15 specific, high-ranking rebels be allowed to return to Castile on the very next ships available.
So, not a mass departure, but a hand-picked group.
It's strategic. He gets his most volatile lieutenants off the island while keeping his core fighting force with him.
The second demand is for those who stay.
And this is the big one. Instead of back pay, they are to be given houses and land grants.
So they go from being mutineers to being landed gentry.
Exactly. It cements their permanent status on the island as a legitimate, autonomous power base. They're not just pardoned, they're foundational colonists.
The third demand is purely about rewriting history.
It's the ultimate political humiliation for the admiral. He had to publicly proclaim that the entire rebellion was not treason, but was actually provoked by false testimony from a few evil men within his own administration.
He had to legally admit that he was wrong and they were right.
Yes, it completely destroyed his moral and legal authority.
And the fourth demand.
The restoration of Roldán to his old office. Perpetual alcalde mayor, or chief judge of the island.
The man who led the rebellion is now the highest judicial power.
And the consequences are immediate. The terms of this new pact even stipulated that the rebels could use force against the admiral's men if he failed to comply with any part of the deal.
Roldán's power is now backed by a legally sanctioned threat of violence.
And he doesn't waste any time using it. By November, he's appointing his own people to positions of power, like Pedro de Riquelme as judge of Bonao.
Riquelme, who immediately starts causing trouble.
He does. Under the excuse of building a cattle fold, he starts constructing his own personal stronghold on a hill, trying to gather discontented followers.
A new center of rebellion.
Potentially. The admiral's relative, Pedro de Arana, sees the danger and starts gathering testimony against him, urging the admiral to intervene. The whole situation is just a house of cards.
So with Roldán now acting as a, let's say, very powerful and unstable chief judge, a new external threat arrives to shatter this fragile peace. Alonso de Hojeda.
Hojeda's arrival in late 1499 just throws gasoline on the fire. He shows up on September 5th with 4 ships.
And he's not there for legitimate business.
Not at all. He immediately starts engaging in unauthorized activities, harvesting valuable logwood, capturing indigenous people for enslavement.
He's undermining the crown's monopoly and the admiral's authority.
But it's more than that. He's a political operative. He's working for the admiral's enemies back in Castile, particularly Bishop Fonseca.
And he comes bearing rumors.
Dangerous ones. He spreads the false story that Queen Isabella, the admiral's main protector, is dead.
The goal being to spark a new island-wide revolt by convincing everyone the admiral has no support left at court.
Precisely. And the great irony is who the admiral has to send to deal with this threat.
His new chief judge, Francisco Roldán.
The man he just fought a 2-year civil war against. Roldán, with 26 of his veterans, marches out to confront Hojeda.
How did that confrontation go?
Hojeda is clever. He avoids a direct fight. He sends supplies to Roldán, pretending to be cooperative, claiming he's just there to get provisions for his ships.
He puts on a show.
A big one. He displays samples of gold and shows off the 600 captives he's taken. He promises to report to Santo Domingo, all while buying time and sowing more discord.
And while Roldán is dealing with Hojeda, the internal problems are still simmering. Riquelme is still building his fort.
Yes, the admiral is juggling these multiple threats. The external crisis with Hojeda and the internal slow-burn treason of Riquelme.
Then Hojeda comes back in February 1500.
He returns to Zaragua, Roldán's old stomping ground, and tries to incite the former rebels again.
He knows their key grievance is money.
And he makes them an offer they can't refuse. He promises to get them all their back pay directly from the sovereigns and offers to lead them to capture the admiral, dead or alive.
And many of them are persuaded.
Many are. So Roldán has to march out again. This time Hojeda retreats to his ships. There's a standoff.
Which turns into a trap.
It does. Hojeda lures some of Roldán's men onto a boat, pretending to want to talk, and then takes off with them as captives, killing and wounding several.
So Roldán has to pursue him at sea.
He does, and he eventually corners Hojeda, forcing him to release the men and promise to leave the island for good.
But even with Hojeda gone, the instability remains.
It's like a disease. Some of the old rebels just can't stop plotting. This leads to the final conspiracy of this period.
The Mujica conspiracy.
Led by Adrian the Mujica, another one of the principal rebel leaders. He conspires with a man named Guevara in mid-June of 1500.
And their plan?
To capture Roldán, imprison the admiral, and take over the island themselves.
But this time the response is different. There are no negotiations.
None. The admiral has learned his lesson. This is the last straw. Roldán discovers the plot, arrests the leaders, and informs the admiral.
And the admiral orders swift justice.
Roldán puts Mujica on a quick trial and executes him as the ringleader. The other conspirators are imprisoned or banished.
And this decisive, brutal action actually works.
For a time, yes. It restores a fragile order. The message is finally clear. The penalty for treason is now death, not a land grant.
So while the admiral is barely holding the island together through force, his enemies are hard at work back in Castile.
They're sending a constant stream of letters and complaints to the crown, building a case against him.
What were the main charges?
That he and his brothers were cruel foreigners, unfit to govern. That they were hiding the island's true wealth from the crown for their own gain.
They even used religion against him.
A very strategic charge. They claimed he was obstructing the conversion of the indigenous people in order to win them over to his side, to use them against the sovereigns. It implied he was trying to build his own personal kingdom.
And at the same time, you have all these unpaid Spaniards returning from the island, making a scene at court.
A huge public scene.
Yeah.
At the Alhambra, groups of 50 or more would follow the admiral's sons around, shouting, "Pay, pay," and insulting them. It was a massive public embarrassment for the crown.
All of this, the constant reports of chaos, the public protests, it forces the king to act.
He decides to send a judge to investigate. But this isn't just an investigator.
No, this judge has the power to take over.
If he finds the admiral guilty, he is authorized to remove him from power and become the new governor himself.
And the man chosen for this job is Francisco de Bobadilla.
A knight commander of the Order of Calatrava. He's appointed in May 1499 and given sweeping, almost unlimited powers.
He arrives in Santo Domingo at the end of August 1500, and he doesn't waste any time.
Not at all. He immediately seizes the admiral's house and property. He sizes up the political situation instantly. The rebels are the largest faction, so he sides with them.
And he makes a grand populist gesture to win them over completely.
He does. He proclaims himself governor and then issues an order exempting everyone on the island from paying any tribute or taxes for 20 years.
An incredible move. It buys him total loyalty at the cost of bankrupting the royal enterprise for 2 decades.
And then on September 7th, he summons the admiral to appear before him.
The admiral complies. He travels from Concepcion to Santo Domingo.
And the moment he arrives, Bobadilla has him and his brother Diego arrested and put in chains.
There's no real hearing, is there?
It's a farce. Bobadilla forbids anyone from even discussing the matter and then proceeds to take testimony only from the admiral's sworn enemies and the rebels. The outcome was predetermined.
Bobadilla dismantles everything the admiral built, selling off his property at auction and pocketing a third of the value for himself.
A complete political and economic subversion.
Which brings us to that powerful, iconic image of the admiral being sent back to Spain in chains.
The public humiliation was extreme and intentional. People were encouraged to shout insults as he was led to the ship. Handbills mocking him were posted all over town.
And then there's that famous moment on the ship with the shipmaster, Andres Martin.
A fascinating detail. The shipmaster, fearing the repercussions of this, offers to remove the admiral's chains.
But the admiral refuses.
He does. He says that since the sovereign's authority put them on, only the sovereign's authority can take them off. He insists he will keep them as a memorial of his service and asks that they be buried with his bones.
A powerful act of political theater aimed directly at the king and queen.
Absolutely. When he arrives in Cadiz in November 1500, the news of his condition causes an immediate uproar. The sovereigns are furious with Bobadilla's harshness.
They order him freed immediately and summon him to court.
They receive him kindly at Granada in December. They assure him his imprisonment was against their wishes and that justice will be done.
And they make promises.
Restitution and punishment. Bobadilla will be ordered to restore his property, and the rebels will be tried.
But they don't restore him to power on Hispaniola.
No, they can't risk another civil war. They appoint a new governor, a professional administrator named Don Nicolas de Ovando.
So the admiral is left in a kind of limbo.
For a while, yes. His enemies at court try to delay his next voyage. It's not until March 1502 that the sovereigns finally give him a clear answer.
What do they tell him?
They assure him again that his privileges will be preserved, his property returned, and that his offices will eventually pass to his son. They urge him to set sail on his next great voyage of discovery.
But from the admiral's perspective, this wasn't enough, was it?
Not really. He knew that these were just promises. He felt that the only way to get true vindication, to see his enemies truly punished, was to continue to serve the crown and achieve something so great they couldn't possibly deny him his rights. Today we're focusing on the fourth voyage of the Admiral, an expedition that ran from 1502 to 1504. And this mission, it really had one single overriding objective.
The Strait. The search for a westward passage that would finally open up a sea route to the Spice Lands.
Exactly. So after he gets his commission from the Catholic sovereigns in Granada, he moves pretty quickly to Seville in 1501 to get the fleet ready.
And this preparatory phase really shows his focus, I think.
Mm.
Despite all the political pressure he was under, he manages to rig 4 ships with round tops in a remarkably short amount of time.
Round tops being the platforms on the mast, crucial for long voyages.
Right. They were essential. And it's important to remember the scale of this fleet. It was quite modest. The largest ship was only 70 tons burden, the smallest 50.
And the crew.
In total, 140 men and boys. That includes, of course, the Admiral himself and his senior officers. And critically, his brother, the Adelantado Don Bartholomew Columbus, was with him.
The Adelantado, his chief deputy, his presence was essential, really, given he would be leading most of the landing parties and the more difficult explorations.
He was the indispensable man on the ground. So the fleet departs Cadiz on May 9, 1502, initially setting a course for Santa Catalina.
But there's an immediate and pretty unexpected diversion right at the start of the journey.
There is. Sailing from Santa Catalina on May 11th, they steer towards Arcilla. The reason was to offer military support to the Portuguese garrison there, which was reportedly under siege by the Moors.
Which is an interesting detail, that sort of Christian solidarity overriding the usual national rivalries of the time.
It is, yes. But as it turned out, by the time the fleet arrived, the Moors had already lifted the siege.
So the gesture was noted, but the aid wasn't needed.
Precisely. The Admiral, following proper protocol, sent the Adelantado and the ship captains ashore to convey their offer of assistance anyway. And during this, the Adelantado meets with the governor of Arcilla, who'd actually been wounded in the fighting.
And the governor was grateful, I assume.
Immensely grateful. And this moment also provides a rare personal connection for the Admiral. The governor sends several gentlemen out to the fleet, and some of them were relatives of the Admiral's late wife, Dona Felipa de Moniz.
A brief link back to his life in Portugal.
Yes. After that, the fleet resumed its course. They left Arcilla on May 20th, made a few brief stops at the Aletas, and then proceeded to Maspalomas in Gran Canaria on the 24th.
This is where they take on the final provisions for the Atlantic crossing.
Right, the critical supplies, water and wood. Then they set their final course for the Indies that very night.
And the crossing itself, the records say it was fairly quick.
It was, yes, characterized as swift. They clearly had favorable winds. They made landfall at the island of Matinino on Wednesday, June 15th.
And they stayed there for a few days.
They did, until the Saturday. It was a customary rest period, allowing the crew to take on fresh water and wood, and just as importantly, to wash their linen. A small detail, but crucial for hygiene and morale on these long voyages.
From Matinino, they sailed west to Dominica and then began running down the chain of Caribbean islands.
That's right. They passed along the south side of San Juan, which we now know as Puerto Rico, on June 24th, before finally setting their course towards Santo Domingo.
And this turn towards Santo Domingo, this was a major change of plans. It wasn't part of the original mission.
Not at all. It was a deviation born of necessity. A critical logistical failure, really. One of his ships, the Caravel Bermuda, was proving to be a serious problem.
How so?
It's described in the records as slow, a crank, which meant it was structurally unstable and, well, dangerously unseaworthy. It couldn't carry enough sail without taking on large amounts of water.
So it was actively jeopardizing the mission.
It was. The Admiral's entire plan was to reconnoiter the coast of Paria and push on until he found that strait he believed was near Veragua. The state of the Bermuda made that impossible. He absolutely had to stop at Santo Domingo to either replace the vessel or undertake major repairs.
Which brings him into immediate conflict with new governor.
Yes. The fleet arrives at the harbor of Santo Domingo on Wednesday, June 29th. The new governor is the Knight Commander of Loris. He'd been sent by the sovereigns specifically to investigate the administration of the previous governor, Bobadilla.
The man who had arrested the admiral and sent him back to Spain in chains.
The very same. And Loris offers no welcome, no courtesy whatsoever.
But the admiral had a more pressing concern than political slights at that moment.
He did. He understood the weather signs far better than anyone in the colonial administration. He immediately sent Captain Pedro de Toreros ashore with 2 messages. First, the request to replace his crippled ship.
And second,
a dire warning. He told him a major storm, a hurricane, was imminent. He specifically advised the Knight Commander not to allow the homeward-bound fleet to depart.
And this homeward-bound fleet was set to sail very soon.
Within 8 days, he was telling them to hold a massive fleet in port because of the overwhelming danger he saw coming.
And the Knight Commander's response was not just a no.
It was an absolute rejection, a political insult. He not only refused the admiral permission to enter the port for shelter from the very storm he was predicting, he also denied permission for the admiral's small fleet to even anchor for safety nearby.
Which sets the stage for one of the most dramatic events of his life.
It absolutely does, because this fleet, getting ready to sail for Spain, was huge, 28 ships in total.
And its passenger list was more important than its cargo.
Much more important. He was carrying Bobadilla, Francisco Roldán, and a whole host of other rebellious figures who had actively worked against the admiral.
His greatest enemies, all on one fleet.
All of them. And the admiral later wrote that the knight commander's decision to ignore his warning and let that fleet sail was nothing less than an act of divine intervention.
His reasoning being that if they had reached Spain,
If they had reached Castile, they would have almost certainly used their political connections to escape any real punishment. They might have even received favors. By sailing into that storm, they were removed from the protection of terrestrial law, as he saw it, and were about to face a much higher form of justice.
and the tempest hit them.
It struck with devastating force just off the eastern end of Hispaniola. The destruction was almost total. The flagship, with Bobadilla and the main group of rebels, sank almost immediately.
Along with how many others?
The record suggests 24 or 25 other vessels went down with it. Only 3 or 4 ships from that entire fleet of 28 managed to survive.
And the story gets even more incredible from there.
It does, because one of the surviving ships, described as one of the 3 meanest or least seaworthy vessels, was the Agaya.
And the Agaya was carrying something very important.
It was. It was carrying 4,000 pieces of gold that belonged to the admiral, which his factor had diligently collected. It was the only significant amount of treasure from that entire massive fleet to make it safely back to Spain.
Meanwhile, the admiral himself is barred from the harbor, forced to ride out the storm.
Yes, he's anchored close to the land, trying to find any scrap of shelter he can. The bitterness he felt, being denied hospitality in the very land he had claimed for Spain, is recorded very clearly in his accounts. The crews suffered terribly as well in that precarious position.
Yet his fleet survived.
He managed to hold the fleet together through his expertise. But that night, the storm intensified, and 3 of his 4 ships were torn from their anchorages.
It must have seemed like the end.
It must have. But through a combination of skill and sheer luck, all 4 ships were saved. The Santos suffered the worst. Its crew had to cut their boat loose to save the ship. And the Caravel Bermuda.
The ship that caused the stop in the first place.
That very one. It was nearly lost. Water was apparently washing clear over her deck. It completely vindicated the admiral's initial judgment about its unsuitability.
So how did they all survive when a fleet of 27 ships was destroyed?
The consensus among the crews was that 2 key decisions saved them. The Adelantado, Don Bartholomew, being an expert seaman, saved the Bermuda by weathering the storm further out at sea. The admiral, in contrast, saved his ships by his tactical choice to anchor as close to the shore as possible.
2 different strategies, both successful.
And this incredible survival, against the backdrop of total annihilation for their enemies, was seen by everyone as divine protection.
And this interpretation was helped along by the convenient presence of an astrologer.
Indeed, a sage astrologer in the fleet was credited with having foreseen the storm. But really, the numbers spoke for themselves. 27 enemy ships destroyed, all 4 of his saved. It was framed as clear divine retribution against Bobadilla and the rebels.
After all that drama, the admiral needed a place to rest and repair.
He did. He took his men to the harbor of Azua on the south side of Hispaniola. So this was a period for rest and reprovisioning and fishing.
And the records mention 2 rather remarkable catches.
They do. The first was a giant ray, described as being the size of a medium bed. A man on the Vizcaína saw it sleeping, apparently, and managed to harpoon it.
And it was powerful.
Incredibly so. Once it was tied by a rope, it towed their boat so swiftly that the oarsmen were useless. It pulled them along until it finally died and had to be hauled aboard with tackling gear.
The second creature was even more unusual for them.
The manatee. A marine mammal completely unknown in Europe. They described its flesh as tasting better than calf meat, and noted that it seemed more like a calf than a fish.
And they correctly observed its diet.
They did. They noted it ate only the grass it found along the shore, a truly unique observation for them.
After the repairs at Azua, they moved on.
Yes, they went briefly to another harbor, Brazil, to shelter from yet another storm. Then on July 14th, they departed, but were immediately caught in a calm. The ocean currents then carried them to some small sandy islands near Jamaica,
Which the men called the Puddles.
Right, because they had to dig shallow holes in the sand to find fresh water. From there, they finally resumed their course south toward the mainland.
This course leads them to the Guanaja Islands.
Correct. They anchored off the largest island, Guanaja, and cartographers later applied that name to the whole group. These islands were about 12 leagues from the mainland, near what we now call Cape Honduras.
And the admiral sends the Adelantado ashore to investigate.
He does, with 2 boats. The indigenous people they met had similar faces to those on the other islands, but the Spanish observers noted their foreheads were narrower.
And they found evidence of more advanced resources.
Yes, the Adelantado saw pine trees and also pieces of what they called calcite. It was copper. The local people were already using it for casting. Some of the crew initially thought it was gold and tried to keep it a secret.
This landing sets the stage for what is arguably the most significant encounter of the entire voyage.
Without a doubt. While the Adelantado was on the island, a massive canoe arrived, almost certainly from the mainland. It was an impressive vessel, 8 feet wide, very long, and carved from a single tree trunk.
But it was the cargo that was so important.
It was the cargo that changed everything. This wasn't just local provisions. This was merchandise, signaling a sophisticated trade network that came from the West, hinting at the great civilizations of what would become New Spain.
It even had an awning.
It did, a palm leaf awning, which they compared to those on Venetian gondolas. It was protecting women, children, and all this valuable cargo. It was powered by 25 paddlers, and they offered no resistance at all.
And the admiral understood the significance immediately.
Instantly. He brought the canoe alongside his flagship. The Spanish officers saw the cargo, and they knew. They believed they were seeing the source of the true wealth of the continent, something far beyond what they'd seen in the islands.
So what was in the cargo?
It was a remarkable inventory. Expensive cotton mantles, beautifully embroidered shirts, breech clouts. They compared to the shawls of Moorish women in Granada.
A sign of refinement in their eyes.
Absolutely. They also had long wooden swords with grooves for sharp flint edges and good quality copper hatchets, along with crucibles for melting the metal.
And their provisions.
They had maize, of course, and a wine made from it that was said to taste like English beer. They also had what the Spanish called almonds, almost certainly cacao beans, which they soon learned were used as currency in New Spain.
The sheer complexity of these goods was a revelation.
It was. It showed a much higher level of industrial and cultural development. And there was an interesting cultural note on their behavior, too. The indigenous people value their items so highly that if one was dropped, they would scramble to retrieve it as if it were a great loss.
They also noted their modesty.
Yes, they explicitly compared their habit of covering themselves if a breech clout was removed to the customs of Moorish women. It was another sign of what they perceived as a more civilized culture.
So the admiral trades with them, but he also makes a strategic decision.
A very strategic one. He detains an older man from the canoe named Yumbe, whom he judged to be the wisest and most authoritative. The goal was twofold: gain intelligence about this new land and use him as an interpreter and guide.
And you may prove to be valuable.
Extremely. He's recorded as serving them loyally while they were in that region, providing crucial information. The admiral later gave him presents and sent him home satisfied before they reached Cape Gracias a Dios.
But the encounter with this canoe led the admiral to a fateful and arguably incorrect decision.
It did. The canoe provided clear evidence of a wealthy, advanced civilization to the West New Spain. He knew these lands were leeward, meaning he could easily sail back to them later.
But his primary mission was still the strait.
His obsession was the strait. So despite this incredible discovery, he made the decision to turn his fleet east, toward Veragua and Nombre de Dios, convinced that was where he would find his passage to the South Sea.
Which history tells us was a major miscalculation.
A fundamental one, likely driven by a misunderstanding. The local use of the word strait probably referred to a narrow strip of land, an isthmus, not a waterway between two oceans.
So the very discovery that paved the way for Spain's eventual conquest of Mexico also caused the admiral to turn his back on it.
That is the great irony of this moment, yes.
So the fleet doesn't linger. They pass by a place they named Caxinas Point.
Right, named after a local fruit. The records note the coastline stretching east from there toward Cape Gracias a Dios was low and open.
And this voyage also highlights some of the major problems with cartography at the time.
It certainly does. Mapmakers who hadn't actually been to the region were making huge errors. They would often depict the same landmass twice on their charts. For example, showing Cape Gracias a Dios and Cape Honduras as two separate places, when they are essentially the same feature.
And this confusion was sometimes exploited.
It was. After 1508, explorers like Juan Díaz de Solís and Vicente Yáñez Pinzón sailed to these areas and claimed to be the first to discover lands the admiral had already charted. They deliberately ignored his prior presence to claim the credit for themselves.
But they were eventually found out.
Yes, a pilot named Pedro de Ledesma, who had actually sailed with the admiral to Veragua, testified later. He confirmed that the mapmakers knew the real geography from the admiral's charts. Their duplication of the land was a deliberate deception to make it seem like their discoveries were beyond the lands the admiral had already explored.
As the fleet moves along this coast, which the admiral names Costa de las Orejas, they notice more diversity among the peoples.
They do. Near Point Caxinas, the people wore dyed shirts and breech clouts, but also quilted cotton jerkins and breastplates.
A kind of armor.
Exactly. It suggested a need for defense, probably from frequent intertribal warfare. But as they continued east toward Cape Gracias a Dios, the people changed dramatically.
How so?
These groups were described as being almost black in color, very different, and they wore almost no clothing at all. The Spanish observers characterized them as being wild in all respects.
And a captive gave them some rather sensational information.
Yes. The report was that these people ate human flesh and raw fish. But the most striking detail, and the reason for the name of the coast, was their ear modification.
Costa de las Orejas, coast of the ears.
Because they pierced holes in their ears large enough to fit a hen's egg. This was the defining characteristic for the Spanish.
Gets all this, they're still observing their religious duties.
Of course. On Sunday, August 14th, the Adelantado and the captains went ashore for Mass. And a few days later, they went ashore again to take formal possession of the land for the Spanish crown.
And the local people approached them during this ceremony.
They did. Over 100 of them, bearing food which they presented to the Adelantado without speaking. He ordered his men to give them hawks' bells and beads in return.
But communication was a problem.
A significant problem. They tried to use an interpreter, but the language gap was too wide for any real exchange of information. Still, the people seemed happy with the gifts.
And more of them returned the next day.
200 more, bringing chickens, roast fish, beans, a wide variety of foods. The Spanish were impressed by the land itself. It was described as verdant and lovely, with pines, oaks, and abundant wildlife like pumas and deer.
And what about their adornments?
They were quite elaborate. Some wore sleeveless shirts, but the most striking feature was body tattooing, with designs the Spanish compared to Moorish patterns: lions, deer, castles applied with heat.
And high-status individuals had specific markers.
Yes, they wore white and red cotton cloths on their heads, and some had long locks of hair over their foreheads. For festivals, their appearance became even more dramatic.
How so?
They would paint their faces black or red, sometimes with stripes, or wear beak-like masks. They also stained their eyes black, creating an appearance that the Spanish records describe bluntly as being like devils.
So the Admiral continues pushing east along this coast, but the going is incredibly tough.
Exceptionally tough. It took them a grueling 70 days to cover just 60 leagues to get to Cape Gracias a Dios.
And that's why he named it Thanks Be to God.
Precisely. It marked the point where the brutal, contrary currents finally started to ease up. Before that, it was just constant tacking back and forth, losing ground, then gaining it. The water was dangerously shallow. The anchorages were few. It was a navigator's nightmare.
But on September 14th, the geography finally shifts in their favor.
Yes, the coast turned south. This allowed them to finally use the prevailing easterly winds to their advantage and make steady progress.
So the dangers didn't just disappear.
Not at all. A couple of days later, a boat was swamped by heavy surf while trying to enter a river, and a crew member drowned. The admiral named the place Rio de Desastres, River of Disasters.
From there, they continued south until they reached an island named Quiribri near a village called Carrier.
And the land here was a stark contrast to what they'd been through. It was fertile, high, with groves of palm trees. The admiral was so taken by it, he named a nearby settlement La Huerta, the garden.
But the local reception wasn't so welcoming.
No, it was immediately defensive. Many people from Carrier came out heavily armed with bows, arrows, and wooden clubs, clearly prepared to resist a landing.
But they were also willing to trade.
They were, eager to trade their weapons, cotton cloaks, and especially their guanine pendants. That's a gold-copper alloy for Christian relics or jewelry. The Spanish sailors were swimming out to trade with them.
But the admiral put a stop to it.
He did. He forbade his men from accepting any of their goods. It was a diplomatic strategy. He wanted to show that they weren't motivated by greed, so he just offered them presents instead.
How did the natives react to that?
They seemed confused. maybe even offended. They retreated and left all the presents the Spanish had given them tied up together on the shore.
So they saw it as a sign of mistrust.
It seems so. The next day, they sent out their own diplomatic mission. An elderly, respected-looking man with a banner, accompanied by a young girl and some other youths.
And the admiral responded cautiously.
Very cautiously. He sent a boat ashore with just water, making no aggressive signs. The natives, through gestures, insisted the old man and two of the girls stay with the Christians. So they did. The Spanish treated them well, gave them clothes, and returned them the next day.
And that seemed to ease the tension.
It did. The people rejoiced at their safe return. But the cultural gap remained vast. The adelantado went ashore and two men guided him to sit on the grass to talk.
And this is where the writing incident happens.
Yes. The adelantado takes out his pen and paper to take notes, and the effect is immediate. They are terrified. They flee, believing that the act of writing is some form of witchcraft being used against them.
So they respond with their own form of magic.
Exactly. They came back and started acting like sorcerers, scattering powder in the air and burning something that produced a foul smoke, directing it towards the Spanish. Their continued refusal to take any Christian items just reinforced the Spanish belief that the natives thought they were evil enchanters.
So after a few days of this, the admiral decides he needs more concrete information.
Right. On October 2nd, he sends the adelantado ashore to survey the area properly. And they find a large wooden palace with tombs inside. Some bodies were embalmed in cotton, others were represented by carved effigies adorned with gold.
And seeing this evidence of a more organized society, the admiral makes another pragmatic, if controversial, decision.
He does. He seizes 7 of the leading men. His rationale was that he needed them as guides and as a source of intelligence. He sent the others back with gifts to try and prevent an immediate uprising.
His plan was to eventually ransom them.
Yes, that was the idea. And the very next day, the local people came out to the flagship with small wild boars as a ransom for their leaders.
But the admiral decided to keep them longer.
He did. The need for information was paramount. But he did pay for the boars and sent them ashore. This whole incident led to some interesting observations about the local wildlife.
The gray cats.
Yes, likely pumas. They were described as being the size of a small greyhound with incredibly strong tails that used to hang from branches. A crossbowman shot one, but it remained so fierce they had to sever its legs to handle it. Even a trained ship's dog was terrified of it.
And there was an interesting interaction between one of these captured cats and the boars.
A fascinating one. A boar was thrown on the deck near the cat, and the cat immediately coiled its tail and seized the boar by the snout. This led the Spanish to conclude that these felines were the primary predators in the region, hunting in a similar way to wolves in Spain.
After this, on October 5th, the admiral sails on.
He does, proceeding to Surabaya Bay. It was a large, well-sheltered bay, easy to navigate. They anchored near an island and found 20 beached canoes.
And people wearing gold.
Just gold. They were otherwise unclothed, but wore either a gold mirror or a guanine eagle around their necks. This was the clearest sign yet of accessible gold wealth.
And they were willing to trade it for very little.
Very little. They traded a gold mirror weighing about 10 ducats for just 3 hawk's bells. It confirmed the local abundance of the metal.
When they went to the mainland, the natives there were more reluctant.
They were, so the Spanish reverted to their established tactic. They seized 2 of the principal men and questioned them using the Carey interpreters. These men confirmed that the gold mines were only a day or two's journey inland.
And the people here were also heavily adorned.
Yes, with body paint white, black, red, and yellow, and minimal cotton cloths.
The fleet continues east to Alberema.
On the Guaiga River. And here they were met with open hostility. Over 100 men rushed out, brandishing spears, blowing horns, beating a drum, and performing what seemed to be a ritual of aggression, spitting a chewed herb at them.
But the Spanish managed to pacify them.
They did, by simply remaining still and non-confrontational. It worked. They ended up trading a few hawk's bells for 19 gold mirrors, worth a handsome 150 ducats.
But the peace didn't last.
It didn't. The next day, the natives were in hiding, and when they did appear, they were aggressive again, threatening to throw spears if the Spanish didn't leave.
And this time, the Spanish responded with force.
A calculated response. A crossbowman shot one man in the arm. It caused immediate fear and the group fled. Afterwards, a few men were able to land and trade for 3 more mirrors peacefully.
The admiral then moved on quickly to Katiba.
Right. And here, the interactions were peaceful again. Men in a canoe came out and traded 19 mirrors of fine gold without any issue.
And this is where they see the first signs of stone construction.
Yes, the first time in the Indies they'd seen any building with lime and stone. It was so significant to the admiral that he ordered a piece of it be taken as a souvenir.
From there, they continue along the coast of Veragua, a region now famous for its gold.
A 50-league stretch of coast known for gold trade. But the admiral, still fixated on the strait, decided not to stop.
Until November 2nd, when he enters a large, beautiful harbor.
A place he named Portobello. It was thickly populated, the land was cultivated, and he anchored there for 7 days, tracked by foul weather. During that time, they traded for food and spun cotton, and the natives only wanted small brass trinkets in return.
After Portobello, they sail east again, but are pushed back by the wind.
Yes, forced back to a group of islands where Nombre de Dios is now. The admiral called it Porto de Bastimentos, Port of Provisions, because of all the maize fields.
And here they had an encounter with some natives in a canoe who chose a rather dramatic escape.
They did. Fearing the Spanish, they deliberately sank their own canoe and escaped by swimming. The Spanish sailors couldn't catch them. They could dive and resurface like waterfowl. It was a completely futile chase.
They stay there until November 23rd, making repairs, then head east again.
To a place called Guiga. There, they traded for food and small gold pendants that the people wore in their ears and noses.
And on November 26th, they enter a very small, very tight harbor.
A place they named Retreat. It was so narrow it could only hold a few ships, with a treacherous rock-lined entrance. This narrowness, though, actually protected them from attack.
Because tensions here escalated quickly.
They did. They were stuck there for 9 days in miserable weather. At first, trade was peaceful, but then sailors started sneaking ashore, acting greedily, and the natives became hostile, gathering in large numbers and threatening the ships.
So the admiral turned to intimidation.
He did. First, he fired the artillery, hoping the thunderous noise would scare them. They seemed to believe it was actual thunder.
But it wasn't enough.
So he escalated. He ordered a cannon fired directly at a group of them on a hilltop. The ball landed among them, and after that, they were terrified. The intimidation worked.
And the people here were described as physically impressive.
Yes, the best favored they had yet seen. Tall, well-built. The harbor itself was noted for its large crocodiles that would come ashore and were said to be capable of dragging a sleeping person into the water.
Finally, on December 5th, facing constant headwinds and hostile locals, the admiral makes a huge decision.
A critical one. He gives up the eastward search for the strait and decides to turn back west toward Veragua. His new objective is singular. Confirm the reports of the gold mines.
But the weather turns against him again.
Almost immediately. The wind shifts and starts blowing from the west, directly in their faces, but he refuses to change course again and decides to push through it.
Which leads them into a period of horrific storms.
Some of the worst imaginable. Days and nights of thunder, lightning, torrential rain. The men were in despair, constantly fighting the elements, convinced the ships were sinking. The psychological toll was immense.
And during this, they witnessed a waterspout.
A terrifying sight. It passed right between two of the ships. The superstitious sailors immediately started reciting the Gospel of St. John, believing it was a form of protection that could dispel it.
After the storms, there was a calm, which brought its own problem.
Yes, sharks appeared. The men saw this as a terrible omen, believing the sharks could smell death.
But they also became a source of food.
A crucial one. Their provisions were ruined, infested with worms. They caught many of the sharks, and the shark flesh became their main source of protein for the next 8 months. They were so hungry they stopped caring about picking the worms out of their biscuits.
They finally find a safe harbor at a place called Huiva.
And they rest there for 3 weeks. They observed that the local people lived in huts built high up in the trees, suggesting a constant fear of enemies.
But the bad weather returns.
It does. They are forced to move between harbors, battling the unpredictable winds of this Costa de los Contrastes, the Coast of Contrasts, as it came to be known. They end up being pinned down until after Christmas of 1503.
During this time, they make repairs and resupply as best they can.
Yes. The admiral later wrote that the suffering during this period was so intense he believed he only survived by remembering and applying lessons from an account of a similar storm written by Diego Méndez.
And then finally a breakthrough.
On January 6, 1503, the Feast of the Epiphany, they anchor near a river the natives called Yebra. The admiral renames it Belin.
And they send boats up the river.
They do. They're told that the richest gold mines are in the province of Veragua. But the initial reception is hostile. The local people gather with weapons to prevent them from landing.
And an interpreter saves the day.
Yes, an indigenous man who had been sailing with them vouched for the Spanish, explaining they would pay for anything they took. This calmed the situation down.
And they finally see the gold.
The natives brought them 20 gold miners, quills of gold dust, and some nuggets, claiming it came from mountains far away.
So with gold confirmed, the admiral moves to establish a base.
On January 9th, the flagship and the Vizcaína cross the river bar into the Blen River. Trade begins immediately. Gold dust for pins and beads. The Adelantado then goes upriver to meet the local king, or cacique, whose name was Quibian.
And that meeting went well initially.
Very well. Quibian came downstream to meet him, they exchanged gifts, and he later visited the admiral on the flagship. Everything seemed amicable.
Until the flood.
Yes. On January 24th, the river suddenly floods violently from heavy rains in the mountains. The flood is so powerful it breaks one of the ship's hawsers, causing it to collide with another vessel.
And this convinces the admiral he can't leave.
The storm at the river mouth was so bad, he knew the ships would be shattered if they were caught outside. So with the gold nearby and a safe harbor, he decides to found a town. The plan is to leave the Adelantado and a group of men there while he returns to Spain for reinforcements.
So the Adelantado first leads an expedition to find the mines.
He does, on February 6th. The local cacique provides guides, and they march for miles, crossing one river 33 times until they reach the mines.
And they find gold easily.
Just lying among the roots of the trees.
Yeah.
The local people had no real mining tools, they just picked it up. But it later turned out these weren't the real mines of Veragua.
What do you mean?
Quibian had deceived them. He had guided them to the territory of his enemies, a place called Urira, likely hoping the Spanish would cause trouble there, allowing him to take over the land.
Despite this deception, the Adelantado presses on with the plan to build a settlement.
He does. He returns to Belen and begins building thatched houses for 80 men, defended by a cannon. A large storehouse was built for provisions. They also outfitted the ship Gallega with fishing equipment for the men who would be staying behind.
And the records from this period give us a lot of detail about the local diet and customs.
A great deal. They ate fish, but they constantly chewed an herb, which the Spanish thought was the reason for their rotten teeth. Their fishing technology was sophisticated, using nets and hooks made of tortoiseshell.
They had methods for preserving the fish as well.
Yes, they would wrap small fish in leaves and dry them in ovens. And their techniques for catching sardines were ingenious.
The one with the canoe partition?
That's the one. They'd put a palm leaf partition down the middle of the canoe, then strike the side with their paddles, causing the fish to leap over the partition into the boat.
And they also cultivated maize for food and drink.
Yes, they made both white and red wine from it, which the Spanish said tasted like beer. They also made wine from the sap of a type of tree and from a pineapple-like fruit.
The last wine mentioned was from a fruit on a very tall tree.
Right. It had a rind like a pomegranate and tasted like a peach. It was identified as the mammy fruit, which they had also seen on the islands.
So this fourth voyage, even though it failed in its primary objective of finding the strait, was still incredibly significant.
It was. It's really defined by this constant struggle against nature. The hurricanes, the storms of the Costa de los Contrastes, set against this incredibly intense period of discovery and documentation of new lands and sophisticated cultures. The level of detail they recorded is an invaluable, if complicated, record of that first contact. And the central tension, turning away from the confirmed wealth of New Spain to chase the phantom of the strait, really remains the key question of this entire expedition.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.
While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.